There is something uniquely unsettling about horror wrapped in the soft language of childhood. The brighter the colors, the sweeter the music, the more terrifying the shadows tucked behind them become. Fazbear Toddler Fun understands this perfectly. It doesn't chase you with jump scares or shrieking monsters. Instead, it whispers nightmares through smiling mascots, corrupted educational videos, and grainy analog recordings that feel like they came from an era you barely remember, yet can't fully forget. What begins as a harmless learning game created by Fazbear Entertainment quickly decays into a psychological labyrinth haunted by grief, vengeance, and the lingering rot of the Afton legacy. A place where stranger danger becomes a warning too late, where animated characters glitch into twisted warnings, and where each lesson masks a trauma so old it feels fossilized in VHS static. And somewhere behind it all lurks Joseph Afton, a ghost with unfinished business, weaving his resentment into the fabric of a children's game. A toy box turned mausoleum, a lesson plan turned curse. Welcome to Fazbear Toddler Fun, where childhood innocence is just the opening lie. Childhood is supposed to be a sanctuary, a small universe of soft colors, simple rules, and stories designed to teach us how to navigate the world safely. But sometimes those stories warp. Sometimes the lessons turn sharp. And sometimes, what looks like a harmless educational game hides something ancient, angry, and deeply personal. Fazbear Toddler Fun is one of those worlds. At first glance, it pretends to be something familiar. VHS-style lessons, friendly animatronics, safety tips meant for children who are still learning how to speak, a digital babysitter crafted by Fazbear Entertainment. But the deeper you go, the more the facade fractures. The lessons start feeling wrong. The glitches feel intentional. The warnings feel like confessions. And behind every corrupted frame lies the unmistakable influence of Joseph Afton, an echo from the darkest corners of the FNaF universe, twisting an educational tool into psychological warfare. Before we dive into this analysis, I want to know something important. Where are you watching from? Tell me your country, your city, your dimension of origin. I want to see how far this story reaches. And tell me, have you ever watched or played Fazbear Toddler Fun? Or is this your first time stepping into this pastel-colored nightmare? If you enjoy deep psychological breakdowns of analog horror, hidden lore, and stories drenched in symbolism, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps me keep exploring these strange corners of digital horror, where corrupted memories and broken pixels reveal more truth than they were ever meant to. Because this series is not just about frightening visuals or disturbing VHS tapes. It is about manipulation, about trauma disguised as entertainment, about a family whose pain crawls across timelines and refuses to die. So sit back, lower the lights, and let's peel away the bright, innocent surface of Fazbear Toddler Fun to uncover the psychological nightmare embedded underneath. Every horror story begins with a promise. In Fazbear Toddler Fun, that promise is safety. Bright colors, cheerful mascots, soft VHS grain, and a smiling Freddy Fazbear inviting toddlers to learn simple life lessons. The game presents itself like a digital picture book, an educational tool crafted to comfort, entertain, and protect. But safety in analog horror is never real. It is bait, a warm blanket hiding something cold underneath. From the moment the player boots up the game, an uncanny tension settles over the experience. At first, it's difficult to articulate. The menus look harmless, almost nostalgic. The music feels familiar, like something you might have heard in an old kindergarten commercial taped over a home movie. The voices are soft and slow, like adults trying too hard to sound friendly. Everything is designed to mimic innocence, and yet, innocence is the first lie the game tells. The opening lesson, Stranger Danger, sets the tone. It pretends to be a simple safety tutorial. A child encounters an unfamiliar adult. Freddy explains the rules, and everyone smiles. But the framing feels wrong. The camera stays too long on the shadowy figure approaching. Freddy's voice seems to glitch, repeating certain words as if they carry more weight than they should. The colors flicker. The edges of the screen distort. Something in the lesson feels staged, rehearsed, forced, as though it is not teaching the child to avoid danger, but teaching the viewer to remember it. This is where the psychological horror begins. It's not in the visuals, but in the feeling that something behind the game is watching you back. As the player continues through the lessons, the illusion of safety collapses slowly, deliberately. Small glitches appear in places that should be stable. Mascots stutter mid-animation. The voiceovers repeat fragments of phrases that don't belong in a children's game. And sometimes, the game seems to respond to the player's hesitation, as though it can sense when you're uncomfortable, when you notice something you weren't meant to see. The brilliance of Fazbear Toddler Fun lies in how it transforms familiar childhood aesthetics into psychological traps. Educational content is designed to be absorbed easily, without question. Children trust what they're shown. They don't question inconsistencies, they accept them. The game weaponizes this trust. It uses the format of learning to manipulate. The animations teach with exaggerated warmth, even when the lessons turn darker. The tone remains cheerful, even as the content becomes more disturbing. This creates a dissonance that gnaws at the player's mind, the sense that danger is being wrapped in comfort. This dissonance reflects a deeper theme: manipulation disguised as care, a tactic the Afton family knows too well. As the game progresses, the presence of Joseph Afton becomes palpable, not because he appears outright, but because the game begins to shape itself around his emotional scars. The lessons no longer feel like warnings for toddlers. They feel like messages pointed directly at Michael, like someone using the game as a stage for revenge, disguised as education. VHS static, corrupted overlays, and sudden tonal shifts begin reflecting Joseph's resentment, his unresolved trauma, and his desire to see others suffer as he did. The environment subtly shifts as well. Colors become more muted. Backgrounds grow emptier, as if places that should be full of life were drained of it. Certain scenes pause just long enough to make you feel watched, even if nothing moves. The game begins to feel like a cage, a closed system with its own will. A system that wants to keep you inside. And in the center of that system stands the idea of the child, the innocent victim, the manipulated viewer, the easy target. Fazbear Toddler Fun uses childhood aesthetics to explore childhood vulnerability, showing how easily narratives can be twisted against those who do not yet understand the world's dangers. Freddy's friendly face becomes a mask. The lessons become warnings. The warnings become threats. And beneath it all, Joseph's bitterness pulses like a heartbeat. As the chapter unfolds, the player realizes the truth. This is not a game about teaching children safety. This is a game about reminding someone of a danger that already happened. A reenactment, a ritual, a weapon made of nostalgia. The psychological horror strikes the hardest here, because it forces the player to confront the uncomfortable thought that childhood, the place we idealize as pure and safe, can be manipulated, corrupted, or rewritten entirely. Safety becomes performance. Education becomes indoctrination. Play becomes punishment. By the end of this phase, the facade of innocence is barely holding together. You can still see the bright colors, the cheerful mascots, the friendly dialogue, but none of it feels comforting anymore. Everything feels like a mask stretched too tight over something screaming underneath. And the player hasn't even reached the darkest layers yet. Those come after the cracks spread wide enough for the truth to spill through. Children's educational videos are supposed to be simple, repetitive, predictable. They speak slowly, calmly, guiding young minds through concepts designed to protect them. Yet in Fazbear Toddler Fun, every lesson feels like an echo from a place that never knew safety. The moment the first training tape begins, you can feel the shift. Something inside the game is teaching, yes, but not teaching you. It is teaching at you, teaching through you, and teaching for someone else entirely. The structure of these videos is eerily familiar. Grainy VHS overlays, mascot puppets, cheerful jingles, and a narrator who sounds artificially enthusiastic, as if scripted by a corporation trying to sell trust. The aesthetics mirror real children's PSAs from the 80s and 90s, the kind you'd find on dusty tapes in school storage closets. But unlike those well-meaning recordings, these lessons are corrupted, morally, visually, and psychologically. The Stranger Danger video is the centerpiece of this unraveling. At first, it plays like any safety PSA. A child walks alone. A friendly narrator explains the importance of caution. Freddy smiles and instructs viewers on what to do. But as the video progresses, the atmosphere darkens. Shadows grow longer. The stranger looms closer. The narration hesitates. Words glitch. The camera lingers too long on moments that should cut away. Every frame feels like a reenactment rather than a message. And that's because it is. The stranger resembles the purple guy. Tall, stiff, featureless, yet unmistakably threatening. But the horror isn't in his presence. It's in the implication that the video isn't warning children about him. It's showing something he already did, something the game is forcing the viewer, and Michael Afton specifically, to watch again. This is where the psychological dimension sharpens. Educational content is normally about prevention. Don't talk to strangers, don't wander alone, stay in safe areas. But here, the lesson feels like punishment. A reminder, a taunt. A way for Joseph Afton to drag someone's guilt back into the light. The video plays like a rehearsed trauma loop, a cursed tape trapped between memory and nightmare, manipulated by someone who wants to inflict emotional harm rather than teach safety. And this is where Joseph's influence becomes undeniable. Every corrupted frame, every glitch, every distorted voice line feels personal. Not corporate, not accidental, personal. The game morphs into a tool of emotional manipulation, a digital weapon aimed at Michael Afton and anyone who shares his sins or his guilt. Joseph doesn't simply haunt the game, he rewrites it. As the lessons progress, subtle metamorphoses occur within the mascots. Freddy's voice grows more strained. Bonnie stares at the camera too long, as if aware of someone behind it. Chica's animations occasionally freeze in unnatural positions, her head tilting with a lifeless curiosity. These are not errors. They are reactions. To the player, to the memories, to Joseph's constant interference. Even the children featured in the tapes, such as Barry and Lily, begin to feel less like actors in a scripted lesson and more like victims trapped inside a loop they cannot escape. Their movements become rigid. Their smiles widen past the limits of authenticity. They speak correctly, but not naturally, like children repeating lines they were forced to memorize. In certain corrupted segments, they seem to look toward the viewer, as if silently asking for help, or warning you to leave while you can. This subtle distortion of childhood innocence is where Fazbear Toddler Fun excels. It weaponizes nostalgia in a way that forces the viewer to confront the darker truths buried beneath educational entertainment. Every generation has seen PSA videos, but few question the emotional mechanics behind them. Here, the game makes you question everything. The psychological horror reaches its peak during lessons meant to teach basic safety rules. Messages like, always stay close to your guardian, or never go into dark places alone, twist into accusations. Double meanings form beneath the surface. The game repeats phrases that feel directed at someone specific, not the player, but Michael. Lines like, you should have been there. Why didn't you stop him? You left us alone. These phrases appear subtly in corrupted subtitles, background whispers, or audio reversals. They hit not just as spooky elements, but as emotional daggers. Joseph is not teaching children. He is haunting his brother. This transforms the entire educational structure into something chillingly symbolic. Lessons meant to instruct become confessions. Warnings become threats. Safety rules become emotional traps. And through this, the viewer begins to understand that the horror of Fazbear Toddler Fun doesn't lie in monsters or animatronics or VHS static. The horror lies in how memory can be weaponized, in how trauma can be repackaged as education, in how a child's fear can be replayed endlessly, disguised as learning material. The game's analog format enhances this. VHS recordings degrade. They warp. They blur truth and fiction until both bleed together. This decay mirrors Joseph's emotional state. Fragmented, deteriorating, looping through pain he never escaped. In every flicker, you see a memory struggling to surface. In every glitch, you feel a message being forced through. In every lesson, you witness trauma masquerading as instruction. By the end of this portion of the story, the viewer is left with one chilling realization. None of these videos were made to protect children. They were made to torment someone who failed to save them. And in that twisted purpose, the true psychological horror of Fazbear Toddler Fun begins to take shape. Every analog horror has a puppeteer, a shadow behind the screen tugging at invisible strings. In Fazbear Toddler Fun, that puppeteer is not the purple guy, nor the animatronics, nor even the corporation behind the smiling mascots. The true architect of terror is Joseph Afton, an entity suspended between memory and malice, using the digital ruins of a children's game to rewrite his own story. At first, his presence is subtle. A flicker in a loading screen, a corrupted frame too specific to be accidental, a whisper embedded in static that sounds suspiciously like a name. But the deeper the player descends into this corrupted world, the more Joseph's influence shifts from background noise to dominating force. The game is alive, yes, but it is alive because he is inside it. The psychological horror of this chapter is not in what Joseph does, but in how he does it. He never appears fully. He never announces himself. He never storms onto the screen with supernatural theatrics. Instead, he manipulates reality the way guilt manipulates memory. Subtly, persistently, quietly enough that you don't notice until the damage is irreversible. The first signs of his interference appear in transitions. A cheerful jingle cuts out halfway, replaced by a low hum. A freeze frame shows a child looking off screen, frightened by something the tape pretends is not there. A cartoon mascot twitches unnaturally, as if pulled by an unseen hand. Joseph doesn't just haunt the content, he rewrites it. He twists friendly scripts into accusatory messages, transforming benign lines into emotional knives. Freddy's cheerful lessons begin to feel strained, interrupted, as though the mascot itself is resisting whatever Joseph is forcing through the tape. When lines begin to glitch, the distortion doesn't feel random. It feels like two voices fighting for control of the narrative. For a character who rarely appears, Joseph's presence is suffocating. Thematic clues tie him to the game's purpose. The corrupted lessons revolve around danger, guilt, abandonment, and loss. The emotional scar tissue of the Afton family. The educational tapes feel less like PSAs and more like trauma loops. Fragments of Joseph's own experiences projected onto innocent characters. He uses the children inside the game the same way he was used. As pawns. As victims. As echoes of a tragedy he cannot let go. His fixation on Michael Afton becomes clearer with each glitch. The game stops talking to the player and begins talking at Michael. Subtle messages, barely visible unless you pause at the right frame, appear in corrupted text. You left me behind. You didn't stop him. You let it happen. It becomes evident that Joseph is not manipulating the game for entertainment, but for vengeance. A brother forgotten. A child consumed by the aftermath of the Afton legacy. A ghost made of resentment. This emotional depth transforms Joseph from a simple antagonist into a psychological force. He isn't just a spirit haunting a program. He is a symbol of unresolved trauma, the kind that festers and reshapes environments around it. His pain bends the game's reality the way grief bends memory. Entire scenes warp under his influence. Colors dim, characters freeze, layout patterns repeat in unnatural loops. Even the mascots begin to show signs of distress. Freddy's voice occasionally breaks. Bonnie's eyes twitch as if controlled externally. Chica's recorded lines shift tone mid-sentence as though her innocent persona is being overwritten. The puppets are becoming hosts. One of the most disturbing mechanics occurs when the game forces the player into dream sequences. These aren't dreams. They're Joseph's memories reframed through the lens of game imagery. Shadows of children running, a cold hallway, a door that won't open, a scream muffled by static. These sequences repeat with minor variations, resembling intrusive thoughts rather than playable levels. The player is not exploring a fictional world. They are walking through Joseph's trauma. This technique reflects a powerful psychological truth. Trauma doesn't stay still. It replays, it glitches, it corrupts the present. Joseph uses this concept as a weapon. The player becomes trapped in a digital feedback loop of fear and guilt, mirroring Joseph's internal torment. It's not just horror, it's empathy, twisted into punishment. But the most chilling moments occur when Joseph tries to breach the boundary between the game and the viewer. At rare points, characters look directly at the camera, as if seeking the real person behind the screen. A mascot's voice shifts into something more human. A child whispers something not in the script. Sometimes a single eye blinks from the static, too human to belong to an animatronic. Joseph is trying to reach out. Not to be saved, but to make someone else feel what he felt. What makes this chapter truly terrifying isn't the supernatural intrusion, but the psychological implication. Joseph is not just manipulating the game, he is manipulating your perception. He alters what you think you saw. He disrupts your sense of time. He blurs the line between lesson and threat. He forces you to see familiar FNaF imagery through the lens of emotional decay. By the end of this segment, the viewer realizes that Fazbear Toddler Fun is no longer a game corrupted by a ghost. It is a haunted narrative, shaped by a child whose pain never found peace. Joseph Afton is not the monster of this story. He is its wound, and every glitch is his heartbeat. In every analog horror that disguises itself as something made for kids, there comes a moment when the masks fall off, and the viewer realizes that the children inside the story aren't characters at all. They are mirrors, reflections, symbols of innocence caught in the middle of something far bigger than themselves. In Fazbear Toddler Fun, Barry, Lily, and the child versions of the FNaF mascots are not there to entertain. They are there to suffer, to reenact, to carry fragments of a history that refuses to stay buried. As the game begins shifting under Joseph Afton's influence, the children become the emotional core of the nightmare. Their cheerful animations glitch. Their smiles grow stiff. Their eyes flicker with an unnatural emptiness. They begin to resemble puppets held upright by strings too tight, too thin, too strained. It becomes clear, painfully and devastatingly, that these children are projections of Joseph's memories, recreations of moments he can't let go. At first, Barry and Lily appear as typical PSA children, polite, enthusiastic, slightly robotic in the way kids look when performing for a camera. But as the lessons distort, their roles change. They become trapped in liminal loops, repeating actions with increasing panic, as if the tape is forcing them to relive a moment they never survived. In the Lost Child segment, Lily's animation resets repeatedly while she cries for help. The lighting grows dimmer with each loop, and the background, once a bright, happy playground, begins to decay. The trees lose color, the slide rusts, the sky turns gray. The environment mirrors Joseph's emotions, his grief rewriting the scenery. Barry's story is even more chilling. During certain corrupted sections, his dialogue shifts into something that doesn't belong in a safety lesson. He begins speaking in whispered tones, asking, "Is someone coming? Was I supposed to hide? Why didn't he help us?" The he is never named, but we know who it is. Joseph knows too. That is the most terrifying part. These children are not teaching lessons. They are performing trauma. Every glitch becomes a reenactment. Every freeze frame becomes a silent scream. Every PSA becomes a memory of someone who didn't make it out. This is where the psychological weight of the series becomes overwhelming. Fazbear Toddler Fun is not simply haunted. It is reenacting the cycle of victimization embedded in the Afton legacy. The children exist in a closed narrative loop, condemned to replay Joseph's unresolved agony. They are ghosts of a tragedy the game refuses to let die. Even the toddler versions of Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy are not immune to this transformation. Their playful animations grow unsettling. Freddy's smile becomes stiff and hollow, as though someone else is forcing his face into place. Bonnie glances off screen as if expecting danger. Chica's movements are jittery, as though she senses a threat the game won't explicitly show. Foxy's segments are the most disturbing. At times, his eye flickers, not mechanically, emotionally, as though whatever Joseph is forcing through the tape is overwhelming him too. This raises an uncomfortable truth. The animatronics, even in toddler form, are not villains here. They are victims, hosts, empty containers for Joseph's projections. The viewer begins to see them not as machines, but as children caught in a psychological crossfire they never asked to be part of. The game reinforces this theme through layout and pacing. Certain lessons force the children into impossible situations where the correct answer doesn't matter. They fail no matter what. They suffer no matter what. The game lies, manipulates outcomes, and punishes them for variables they cannot control. This mirrors Joseph's internal reality. The belief that children like him never had a chance, that the world was stacked against them from the beginning. This sense of fatalism permeates every frame. When Barry disappears from one of the later tapes, he doesn't fade out. He's ripped away. The screen tears open with visual distortion, as if the game itself is rejecting the idea of letting him exist safely. Lily, too, begins to glitch in ways that make it obvious she is losing her place in the narrative. Her voice breaks mid-sentence. Her eyes roll into static. She tries to speak to the viewer, not the player, but the real viewer. But Joseph's influence interrupts her every time. The most haunting moment comes in a hidden segment where multiple children appear in a dimly lit room. Their outlines are vague, like shadows taped over with translucent film. They speak in overlapping whispers, repeating words associated with fear and regret. Why? Run. Don't trust him. Too late. He's coming back. It feels like a funeral service being conducted by the dead themselves. The psychological brilliance lies in how the children reflect Joseph's worldview. They are frightened, confused, unprotected, searching for someone who never arrives. They represent the vulnerable parts of Joseph's identity, the parts that were harmed, ignored, or manipulated. The game forces these representations to relive symbolic punishments that mirror his pain. He isn't trying to free them. He's trying to make Michael feel what he felt. He's trying to baptize the player in fear. The children are not characters in a story. They're artifacts of trauma, and Joseph pulls their strings with hands shaped by grief. By the end of this chapter, the viewer realizes a terrifying truth. The game's horror is not about jump scares, monsters, or ghosts. It is about watching innocence being twisted into a tool of revenge. It is about seeing children, real or recreated, used as vessels for unresolved agony. It is about confronting the emotional shrapnel left behind by the Afton legacy. In the maze of this corrupted children's game, every character is trapped. Every child is haunted. Every smile is a wound. And they are all waiting for someone who never came to save them. In Fazbear Toddler Fun, nothing truly ends. Lessons repeat. Tapes rewind. Mascots glitch back into scripted smiles. Children reappear in places they should not be. And the player, trapped inside a pastel nightmare, begins to feel the weight of something inescapable. This is not a story that moves forward. It is a story that circles back on itself, again and again, like a childhood memory you can't stop revisiting, no matter how much you want to. This looping structure is no accident. It is Joseph Afton's design, a labyrinth made of regret. Every cycle in the game represents an emotion Joseph never resolved, replayed endlessly in a digital environment that has become his personal purgatory. The deeper the player goes, the more the loops tighten. Choices become illusions. Paths collapse into each other. The game begins speaking in metaphors rather than mechanics. The lesson screens start repeating fragments from earlier videos, but twisted. Soft lullabies become distorted. Safety phrases return rewritten as threats. Instructions meant to guide toddlers become taunts aimed at Michael Afton. You should have watched. You should have stayed. You should have saved us. The guilt is no longer subtle. It is the heartbeat of the game. Where most horror narratives escalate through action, Fazbear Toddler Fun escalates through recursion. Each loop reveals another layer of Joseph's resentment, another psychological scar, another emotional fracture. The horror becomes internal, pressing inward on the viewer like a collapsing tunnel. This is the purest form of psychological storytelling, a narrative built not around monsters, but around the inability to escape your own past. The game mechanics begin breaking down entirely as the loops intensify. Tapes rewind without being touched. Clickable options disappear. Certain areas load into entirely different timelines, as if Joseph is trying to show multiple outcomes of the same trauma simultaneously. In one loop, Barry runs. In another, he hides. In another, he is simply gone. The player realizes that these are not alternate endings. They are alternate memories. Joseph is not replaying what happened. He is replaying versions of what could have happened. Every variation exposes a different angle of his pain, a different regret, a different narrative he wished could have saved him. But none of them do. Because Joseph cannot rewrite the past, he can only replay it. Infinitely, unforgivingly, desperately, and he drags everyone else into that endless loop with him. The dream sequences begin blending with the tapes. Joseph's voice merges with the mascots. Glitches form shapes resembling hands reaching out or pulling someone back in. Entire scenes freeze on images that feel less like VHS distortion and more like snapshots of someone trapped mid-scream. One particularly haunting sequence shows Lily walking down a hallway, her tiny figure flickering every few steps. The hallway extends unnaturally far, repeating door patterns in an impossible geometry. When she calls out for help, her voice layers with Joseph's child and ghost overlapping in a single broken plea. Please don't leave me again. The player is forced to sit with the implication. Joseph is using these children to speak the words he never got to say. This is where Fazbear Toddler Fun transcends simple horror. It becomes an exploration of how trauma forces the mind to rewrite experience. The loops represent memory distortions. The corrupted tapes represent intrusive thoughts. The altered mascots represent emotional placeholders, symbols Joseph attaches meaning to, even when they were never meant to serve that purpose. Michael becomes the target not because Joseph wants to kill him, but because Joseph wants him to feel, to understand, to suffer the way he did. He wants closure, but closure twisted by resentment becomes punishment. The final loops of the game grow increasingly unstable, mirroring Joseph's desperation. Freddy glitches into a creature of static. Barry's voice shatters into fragments of crying. The screen displays contradictory instructions, as if the game itself is having a breakdown. Scenes from earlier chapters reappear, but the faces are wrong. Eyes too dark, smiles too wide, movements sluggish like marionettes drowning in their own code. These distortions signal Joseph's loss of control. His emotional grip is slipping. His influence is tearing the game apart, the way trauma tears through the psyche. The most chilling sequence appears near what should be the ending. The screen goes black. A single line of white text appears. He didn't listen. Then the static clears, revealing a loop of Joseph as a child, not physically, but symbolically. A trembling outline, sobbing softly, reaching toward the viewer. The screen distorts every time his hand gets close, as if the game cannot render the intimacy of that gesture. You cannot touch him. You cannot save him. You can only watch. That is the essence of psychological horror. The helplessness, the witnessing, the drowning in someone else's memory. The game breaks soon after. Menus collapse. Voices overlap. Characters glitch into silhouettes. The educational facade disintegrates completely, leaving only the raw wound beneath it. And then, silence. Not peace. Not an ending. Just silence. Because Joseph Afton's story cannot end. Not here. Not in a children's game. Not in a loop built from regret. The loop continues because Joseph continues, and the player leaves the game realizing that the true horror was never the purple guy, never the VHS tapes, never the mascots. The true horror was the persistence of trauma, living on in every line of corrupted code. Trauma doesn't stop just because a game ends. It lingers, it repeats, it waits to be acknowledged. And Fazbear Toddler Fun, in all its pastel terror, forces you to acknowledge it. In the end, Fazbear Toddler Fun is less a horror series and more a confession, a fractured echo of childhood pain wrapped in bright colors, friendly mascots, and the illusion of safety. What begins as an educational game quickly becomes a psychological mirror reflecting everything the Afton family tried to bury: guilt, abandonment, regret, and the silent suffering of a child who never got to grow up. The analog tapes, the corrupted lessons, the terrified children, the endless loops, none of it exists for entertainment. It exists because trauma lingers. Trauma teaches. Trauma repeats itself until someone finally listens. But now the question is yours. What does this story teach us? Is it a reminder that danger can hide behind familiarity? That childhood fears can linger for a lifetime? That unresolved pain can reshape entire worlds, even digital ones? How does this apply to the real world? Maybe it mirrors the way guilt traps us in loops. Maybe it shows how we rewrite memories to cope with them. Maybe it warns us to listen to the silent fears of children, the ones too often ignored. And what about you? What part of Fazbear Toddler Fun stayed with you the most? Was it Joseph's desperation? The broken innocence of the children? The manipulation behind the lessons? Share your experience in the comments. I want to hear your perspective, your interpretation, your emotional reaction, because stories like this only gain meaning when they spark conversation. If you enjoyed this psychological deep dive, remember to like, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from. Your support brings more hidden horrors to light. Until next time, stay safe, trust your instincts, and never underestimate the shadows hiding behind a friendly smile.